Hi, I'm Johnny from UltimatePaperMache.com. I just got my lamb pattern done and I want to show you how I got the wool texture using paper mache clay and a stamp made with a crumpled up ball of aluminum foil. I got the idea because I had used a long, skinny, kind of curvy piece of tin foil on the bear to get his nice long fur, and I wanted to see if you could also get a texture that looked more like wool, and it worked really well. I'm really happy with the way this came out. It was really easy and it was kind of fun. I want to show you how to do it. Let's get started. I'm using my new lamb pattern, so of course I had to put it together first. But as soon as I had the ears on, I added some paper strips and paste to the parts that don't need any wool. That's right around the face, the inside of the ears, and the one hoof that's showing. I just used torn newspaper strips and cooked flour and water paste for this project. It went really fast because there wasn't very much really to cover. I started adding the paper mache clay to the lamb as soon as the paper strips and paste were dry. I put it on quite a bit thicker than I normally do when I'm using paper mache clay. I usually put it on really thin so it'll dry really fast, but this time I really wanted a fairly thick texture. Then I just started dabbing the foil into it and made the wool texture. You have to get the foil slightly wet by dipping it into a saucer of water, but you don't want to get it so wet that it makes the paper mache clay soggy, because if you do that then you'll lose some detail. But basically it was really easy and went really quickly. This particular batch of paper mache clay that I'm using, like I said, it was left over from a previous project, and that was the video where I showed you how to make your own glue so that you can make paper mache clay with DAP drywall joint compound. I wanted to make sure that you could also use this trick with the regular original paper mache clay formula that we normally use, and so I did try it. I had some left over of that from the bear, and I tried it, and both of them do work. But oddly enough, I did find a difference. That the batch made with the homemade glue was stiffer, and it did hold the details of the stamp a little bit better while it was drying than the batch that I had left over from the bear, the original paper mache clay recipe. I think the reason for that is, well, basically the version with the homemade glue is just naturally a little bit stiffer. I noticed that when I was first made it up for the other video. But also when I was making the original paper mache clay for the bear, I didn't use as much flour as the recipe calls for. And I could have fixed that just by adding a little bit more flour, but I didn't want to mess with that. I just wanted to kind of test it out. Now, it didn't take me very long before I ran out of areas where I could actually hold on to the lamb without messing up the wet paper mache clay. So I needed to let it dry before working on the rest of the lamb. And I didn't want any visible lines where new wet clay was added. So I made sure to flatten the edges of the wet paper mache clay before I put the lamb in front of the furnace vent to dry. I'm using, like I said, a fairly thick layer of the paper mache clay, so it did take longer than usual to dry. But overnight it got to the point where it was dry enough that I could hold it and start working on the rest of it. It wasn't dry all the way through, but it was dry enough to be safe to work on. I did have to replace the foil ball every once in a while just because the bumps got flattened when I was using it. And some areas did need a smaller stamp just to get into the dips around the knees and the tail, and sometimes you just had to play around with it and make a new one, but it takes about 25 seconds to make a new one, so that's no big deal. I looked at photos of lambs to see where to put the wool around her face. A lot of lambs have short fur on their muzzle, right above the eyes, and on the inside of their ears. I didn't put any wool on the one hoof that was showing either. Now I didn't put any wool on the inside of the ears, but I wanted the wool to kind of show around the edges when I was looking at her from the front. So I used a smaller piece of foil and just kind of dabbed it all the way around the edges to give her that texture. And then before putting her back in front of the furnace vent, I also added just a little bit of paper mache clay to her nose, where I added some details with foil before putting the paper strips on there. It just didn't come out quite as smooth as I wanted it to, and the paper mache clay very easily fixed that for me. And then I let her dry again in front of the furnace vent, and it took about 3 days to be totally dry all the way through. You obviously can't paint any paper mache of any kind if it's damp at all, because you don't want to trap moisture on the inside. So I just had to be really patient and let her sit there and dry out. It definitely not an instant project, just because the paper mache clay was so thick. But eventually she did get dry, and I was able to go ahead and paint her. And I did that really, really fast. I just used a coat of warm white first. I'm using acrylic paint. I usually put on a coat of acrylic gesso or some latex primer first, but I didn't have any. It was really cold and slick outside. I didn't want to go to the store, so I just used what I had and painted the paper mache directly. It does work. It took a little bit longer probably than using gesso, but it works. I let the white paint dry, and then I painted her face and hoof with a warm black. I just warmed up some black with a little bit of burnt umber. And then I put just a little bit of a stripe of white around her eyes and some reflection spots. That's really the only details I added. So she's all done, and I think she just came out really cute, even though I did paint her really, really fast. And I should mention that I had intended right from the very beginning, when you're thinking about a project, you kind of have an idea of what it's going to look like when it's all done. And I knew I wanted to make a black and white lamb. But when I had that first layer of white on here, I started thinking, well, she sure would be cute. Just with the pink nose and the pink inside of the ears, that would have been really cute too. Now, if you'd like to make a lamb of your own using my pattern, you can find it at ultimatepapermache.com/lamb. There is a small charge for it. You don't necessarily have to put the paper mache clay wool on it if you don't want to, but it really was kind of fun. And if you make one, I really want to see how it comes out. So please come back to my website, ultimatepapermache.com, and click on the Daily Sculptors page link up at the very top. Even if you don't make anything this week, I hope you'll come back and visit that page anyway, because you can see what everybody else is making. So please go do that, go make something, and come visit me, ultimatepapermache.com. I'll see you there.